Welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Integrated Data Center Management, Unifying Buildings, Workloads, and Everything in Between. We'd like to thank you for the time you're going to be spending with us. My name is Mark Gatos. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Nlyte Software. I'll be your host today. If anyone has questions during the presentation, please feel to submit them into chat and we'll try to get to all the questions at the end of the presentation. We're fortunate today to have two data center infrastructure experts who are going to be presenting. First is KG Anand from Carrier Corporation and Enzo Greco, Chief Strategy Officer at Nlyte Software. Take it away, KG.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome to our webinar on integrated data center management. First, I would like to speak with you about Carrier Corporation. We are a $20 billion corporation with a broad portfolio that addresses your data center imperatives to lower operational expense, get better leverage on CapEx, and also ensure safety and security of your data center facilities. With HVAC, we have high efficiency chillers, innovative technologies like evaporative cooling and free cooling. You may be familiar with Marriott water mesh systems, which help you quickly localize a fire event and prevent the widespread damage within the data center. Many Fortune 500 companies have standardized on our Lenel S2 product for their access control. And of course, last but not least, the industry-leading automated logic building automation system on which IDCM is built together with Nlyte Software. With that, I will hand it over to Enzo.
KG, thank you so much. And as Mark introduced, I'm Enzo, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Nlyte. And certainly my thanks for your time and interest on this call. And just a very quick overview of Nlyte. We are the clear and recognized leader in data center management software. We are very well established. We have been in the business for a very long time. We certainly know the industry, the market. We have the benefit and pleasure of having some of the largest and most complex deployments in data center management. And we have the benefit of having quite a broad portfolio. If we look at data center management software, we do everything you would expect, such as managing your power, managing your assets, as well as some things that you wouldn't expect, such as managing your assets, finding those assets, going inside your servers and understanding their behavior, and applying analytics across all of those different points. So that very quickly is an overview of Nlyte. And what I'd like to do is go directly into the topic for which you came. So if we look at really the overview and the best introduction is we understand what's going on with data centers. They've never been more vital. They've never been more central, especially as more and more of us are working from home, especially as we rely on the electronic networks that unite us all, that allow us to work together. Yet data centers certainly have been under the microscope like never before. There's an ever-increasing understanding of their impact on the environment. There's an ever-increasing understanding of just their overall cost. So they need to be more efficient. They need to be ever more available, and they need to be very flexible. By far, the best way of addressing that, of addressing those demands, those imperatives, are by integrating those endpoints, integrating everything from the building, the critical infrastructure, through IT and workloads. And just to emphasize the importance and perhaps some of the issues around data centers today, and I'm sure we have such a broad audience on the call. I'm sure you can all appreciate this, but data center failures are expensive. They have a broad reach. It actually makes news when Google goes down. It makes news when Microsoft Azure goes down and all those applications that are supported on it are unavailable. So not only is it newsworthy, but it's also very expensive. And this is a really good analysis just from last year of the average cost of downtime for enterprises. And of course, this is all related to data centers. So certainly data centers need to be available, but they're also equally critical. And these are just from the very, very recent, some of the headlines. So of course, Wall Street Journal actually had a very good article on what is driving the data center market. And a lot of that, of course, is cloud. A lot of that is work from home with the very distributed environment that we all find ourselves. But as I said, and I think we all understand, there's a lot of focus on sustainability. There's a lot of focus on the amount of power that data centers draw. By most estimates, it's just around 2% of all the electricity consumed in the world. That's an awful lot of electricity. By many accounts, data centers account for as much of a carbon footprint as the entire airline industry. So certainly there's a lot of focus on sustainability. There's a lot of investment being made in making data centers more resilient, more efficient. But where should those investments lie? What are the best areas in the data center to focus on efficiency and sustainability? Excuse me. And of course, as we can see on the lower left, we just have an expectation, much like we have an expectation of our utilities, such as water, telephone, and electricity. We expect our internet to always be on. We expect our applications to always be on. That's a big expectation when we look at the very complex environment that we are all working in. So what we've done with automated logic is focus on integrating the different endpoints within the data center. And we term this market, in fact, Carrier has been focused on defining this market and driving this market, driving this solution called integrated data center management. And as we can read there, it exactly tightly integrates all the different systems you have within the data center in new, unique, creative ways to address some of the biggest requirements that data centers have, namely around efficiency, around reducing costs, improving availability, improving flexibility. And if you look at managing the data center, this is truly the next level of insight, of management, of control for data centers and the entire computing fabric which surrounds them. And data centers, even though they are buildings, they are unique kinds of buildings. And what makes them so unique is the degree in which the building itself is affected by what goes on inside of the building. If we think of most buildings, like pick your poison, hospitals, warehouses, manufacturing, and so forth, most of them, the buildings are quite independent. But think of a data center. In a data center, we may have security concerns at the building level that are affected by the applications that are running within that building. We may have the building itself need to modify its power, cooling, and other metrics based on time of day because of the types of applications that may be running at those times. And of course, historically, and in fact still very common today, the building and facilities in IT were fiercely independent. They were planned separately, they were managed separately, they were often different organizations. But you simply cannot have that if you are trying to achieve the demands on data centers today. You cannot manage these systems independently. They cannot be planned independently. Really, the way of achieving those requirements is exactly through integrating the different systems within the data center, hence integrated data center management. And I think on the benefits, I would like to hand this to KG to highlight some of these.
Thank you, Enzo. So the main benefits of IDCM, which is achieved, these benefits are achieved through an integration between WebCtrl, the industry-leading building automation system offering from Automated Logic, and Nlyte software. You can see those benefits are bolded out there. The 4 of them are increased efficiency, improved effectiveness, reduced risk of outages, as well as improved resiliency and efficiency. So let's talk about efficiency for a moment. When Nlyte understands that an application has gone into quiescent mode or it is idle, passes that information on to WebCtrl, which in turn then talks to the chiller plant and turns down the chiller, the cooling production from the chillers. So you can actually gain quite a bit of energy efficiency and cost efficiency by aligning your workloads and the application behavior with what is going on in the data center and aligning that with resource utilization from the critical infrastructure. Whenever you have planned or unplanned events within the data center, such as maintenance, which can be planned, or if there's going to be an unplanned outage of the chiller plant, this is immediately recognized by WebCtrl based on a number of applications that are built on WebCtrl to monitor the chiller plant health and efficiency all the time. And then this information can be fed to Nlyte to warn and to give information to the IT people as well as to the facilities people at the same time. So much of the time that people spend doing these things, monitoring and otherwise, can actually be automated so that as these events happen, they can be informed on a timely basis. Going back to what is IDCM then, right? So let's look at that. IDCM offers 3 powerful capabilities around capacity management, end-to-end operations management, and energy optimization. Much of the capabilities are listed there in small print. I'm not going to go over that, but I will highlight a few of them. Let's say from a capacity management, you have assets, you have space, and you want to have resource utilization, so all of them align. Capacity management allows you to do that end-to-end, right, even across your security and fire infrastructure. So the whole thing comes into play. End-to-end operations management, whether it's planned events or maintenance events, such as maintenance events or unplanned events, those can be immediately highlighted and sent from WebCtrl onto Nlyte, so everyone within the organization, within the data center, is aware of what's going on. And this extends to security breaches also. Energy optimization, I mentioned we have a number of tools that are monitoring the health and status of the chiller plant and also optimizing its operation for efficiency. This is going to be aligned not just with workloads, but also the configuration and architectures of the chiller plant will align with higher efficiency layouts so that you get the best benefit from all the technologies that Carrier produces as well as Nlyte is capable of delivering. Next slide. So let's take a specific use case. Here we would like to introduce the unique concept of a cooling chain, much like you have a power chain. Let's say it is a maintenance event, and you know that a chiller 2 or one of the chillers in the chiller plant is going under maintenance. And that information is then through WebCtrl relayed to the facilities manager, who is then able to isolate the chilled water that is produced by that chiller, which isolate the part of the data center that's going to be affected by the lack of production from that chilled water chiller, from that chiller. This is then mapped onto the floor of the data center, and this information is then sent to Nlyte, where Nlyte will then take the necessary steps to create the necessary workflows. Over to you, Enzo.
I just want to say, KG, I think you were modest on this cooling chain. This is, if we look at the underpinnings of IDCM, the cooling chain really is one of the most important building blocks. And in the data center, I think we all understand power chains and the power and importance and criticality of power chains. What you and Nlyte have done here is we've extended that very same concept to a cooling chain. So think of all the assets that go into cooling a particular data center. As we all know, cooling assets are far more susceptible to wear, to maintenance, to failure than power. It's just the nature of the equipment. We have a lot of moving parts, complex moving parts. And being able to map all of the affected assets based on cooling is a really powerful and important concept. And in the way that this has been architected, this cooling chain is exceptionally flexible. You can define what the endpoint of the cooling chain is, whether it's the evaporative system, whether it's your cooling tower, whether it's the chiller, whether it's the air handler. You can define what the endpoint of that cooling chain is, and then you can dynamically define all of the assets that are affected by those cooling components. So we've spent jointly a lot of effort and time really understanding the market, understanding to really implement integrated data center management. Incorporating and mapping assets with cooling was one of the most important requirements. And that's exactly what you're seeing here. And in fact, to highlight one of the particular use cases that come out of the cooling chain. So once the cooling chain concept is established and once it's implemented, there's no end of value that comes out of it. And this is one that we'd like to highlight. So what we have in this example is we've identified that there is a failed unit, as you can see on top there. How do we know that it's failed? We were told by WebCtrl. So that's an example of the integration. So we get this information from the underlying system, in this case, WebCtrl. We know that this particular system has failed. And based on that failure, what are the affected assets? What are the affected racks? And perhaps we know that when a particular chiller fails, we have a window in which we need to perform some action, whether it is to move workloads, whether it is as simple as raising alerts. Perhaps if we are in a particular type of facility, we need to alert our users that an event has occurred. But again, once you have that cooling chain in place, there's a tremendous amount of value that comes out of it. And this is a very good example. There's another example that I'd like to highlight in the very unique use case that comes when you're able to integrate the critical infrastructure with the workloads. And in this example, what we have is marrying battery life with workload risk. So one of the key features that WebCtrl performs is based on its analysis of strings and jars and so forth. It can very accurately predict battery life within a given unit. And that's a very important and valuable piece of information. So let's say we have an environment in which it takes SAP 3 hours to fail over. It's one of our most critical applications. We know that it takes that window for it to fail over. Let's say that our battery life then drops below 3.5 hours because we want some buffer. That is a major risk event because should we lose power or have another power anomaly occur, we will not have enough backup to be able to migrate that SAP workload to another environment. So that is a very good example of the integration between the underlying components and IT and workloads. Without that integration, you would not be able to have this kind of insight, have this kind of action. And in truth, this is a very high risk event. So I like in particular this use case because it highlights just the very unique kind of value that derives from integrating these different systems. And KG, this is a good one for you to take.
Yes, thank you, Enzo. And This is on security. So you can see that with Nlyte, we've done a lot of work in integrating our cooling chain. Enzo gave you a very good explanation of all the work that has gone on in the background to get that type of granular information down to the rack level as to how cooling affects it. Then he spoke with you about the power part of it and how you can make decisions. We have extended all these integrations, the special integration we have with Nlyte to security also, and this is bidirectional. So whenever you have a security event, whether it is at a rack level or at a facility level, that is informed through our integration with the OnGuard platform to WebCtrl, which is then passed on to Nlyte to create the necessary workflows. Once the workflows get published, and people can then go figure out where the event happened and immediately take care of it. So all the various technologies that carrier brings to bear, whether it is in fire, whether it's in security access control or in cooling, they are all through a WebCtrl integration integrated now with Nlyte and in a bidirectional sense. So you get a full view into the entire data center stack, right from the critical infrastructure, right up to applications. So yeah, next slide.
Well, actually, KG, I'd just like to interject something on this slide, something that you already said, but I just wanted to emphasize the bidirectional nature. In fact, this is something one of our customers identified. So typically when we think of security, we think of the physical security, especially with systems like Lenel. So we think of parking lot security, we think of door access security. But what the customer identified is, look at it the other way. Imagine that you have an application event, some kind of application breach. You may very well want to regulate automatically access to the facility, cage, or rack, or any other granular element that you have. So the bidirectional security is equally important. And again, it's that integration between the IT and workloads and the underlying critical infrastructure that exactly enables that to happen. So I just wanted to highlight that, KG. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight that you already touched on this slide is, since this is done in workflow, it is remarkably flexible. The endpoints can be easily changed and can be dynamic. What actually occurs in the workflow is all user-defined. It's a very flexible system. It's exactly what you would expect from a very flexible workflow environment. And the reason that we jointly chose a workflow system to implement a lot of these capabilities, such as security breach, such as the battery life element, is because every customer will have a slightly different environment, and workflow is just naturally tailored to managing that kind of flexibility. So I just wanted to highlight that workflow component.
Thank you.
On the next, so let me take this one, KG.
Sure.
So one of the things, again, that we've jointly done is there's a lot of information that is generated in a data center environment. Just think of all the different vectors of information that you have. Traditionally, for analytics, we did certainly a lot of analytics at the critical infrastructure level. Just think of the preventive maintenance, the fault detection and diagnostics that we did at the facility level. And of course, a lot of that drove what kind of maintenance, preventive maintenance and predictive maintenance we would do on our equipment. And we certainly did analytics on the applications themselves, on the IT environment, to be able to predict behavior. But of course, analytics drives on data, and the more data that you have, the more unique patterns you can discern, the more varied input that you have across those analytics, the more unique those patterns will be and the more powerful they will be. So now, what we've done in integrated data center management is, for any monitored point that you have, for any point in your environment, whether it's a thermal setting, whether it's a thermostat, whether it's a certain parameter on your server or an application workload. For any monitored point, we can now take in all of these different vectors of information and allow you to perform anomaly detection, to be able to forecast and predict events for any monitored point. Again, I stress that. And the reason that this is important, particularly important in IDCM, is because the new kinds of data that we're generating, the traditionally different kinds of data, certainly from facility and applications, we're generating different types of data. But once you're able to bring those together, with that correlation, you get just a whole new class of analytics that can be applied to your different points, to your different environments, to your different operations. And that's what we're highlighting here. So whether we are looking for historical and predicted power draw for cabinets, or whether for an individual point we are looking at what is the expected behavior of that point, we can now do that with far more accuracy and far more insight than we ever could before, simply because we are now integrating ever more enriched types of data. So KG, with that, let me hand it back to you.
Sure. Thank you, Enzo. So you may be well aware, we've talked about WebCtrl from automated logic. You may be well aware of Nlyte software, DCIM. So here are a couple of things that I would like to leave you with as we close out this webinar. Automated logic is a industry-leading building automation system, and it takes everything from the utility to the rack. So if you want to think about it, it's everything a facilities manager would be using, whether it is setting alarms and trends for power or cooling management, whether it is fire detection and suppression part of it, or security and physical access. There are a number of applications that we have built onto WebCtrl that monitor the health and status of our HVAC systems, also optimize their operations. So all that information is stored in a database that is available for you to analyze later on to figure out what went wrong or what happened on a certain time. And as this data is also captured on a real-time basis, it is fed to Nlyte, and Nlyte is everything that is going on at the rack. It gives you visibility into that. From a capacity and asset performance and management perspective, you have all the information available to you from Nlyte. Whether it is server power utilization or rack PDU power utilization, all those things are reported back to you. So by integrating these two tools, what we have now is, next slide please. We have a much better solution for across the entire data center stack. You have end-to-end power chain mapping, alarming, and alerting. So across the data center, then you're looking at all the 4 layers, from the infrastructure to the management to the orchestration and to the application layer. You get integration across all 4 layers through this WebCtrl to Nlyte integration. Capacity management based on space, power, and cooling. Any unplanned or planned events or security breaches, you are able to map and both your power and cooling chains, and also figure out the dependencies as to which assets may be affected, and the order allocation of IT assets. So a number of things that Nlyte brings to you as capabilities, as well as WebCtrl brings you as capability from a facilities perspective. All those things get integrated. Now you have a complete view into the operations of your data center. And so I invite you to add any color comments to this.
I gladly will, KG. And in fact, if we look at this slide, when we were putting it together, what we focused on is what is unique So once you're able to integrate these endpoints, once you're able to integrate these different layers, these previously very distinct environments, what's the real unique value that's derived? And that's where we came out with these better together points and values. And if we look at each of these, you simply cannot do it without properly and deeply integrating the different environments. So a very good example, again, if we look at maintenance. So we traditionally do facilities maintenance, but what happens, what is affected when those systems undergo maintenance? And this is a very common issue in data centers. So we typically have to plan maintenance specifically because we have to turn off systems in the data center. But what are the right systems to turn off? How long do they need to be turned off? If I look at placing my next workload, where's the best place that we should place it? And one of the things that we have learned by integrating the different elements in the data center, we actually come up with quite different metrics. So a very good example is if you now know really the entire stack that a workload is running on, you can determine cost per workload. What a great metric. You can determine risk per workload. Running a workload in a particular environment A versus B is not the same risk, is not the same safety. So being able to define those new and really valuable metrics is one of the values that comes out of integrated data center management. So I would like to, at this point, hand it back to Mark.
Thank you, gentlemen. Was very informative presentation. As you can see here, if you'd like to read or view more information about IDCM, we have a variety of links here. Additionally, if you'd like to reach out in person to Automated Logic Corporation or Nlyte Software, we have contacts with Brad and Jeremy, which are on the screen if you'd like to email them directly. Well, gentlemen, it appears we've had some questions that have come up during the presentation, and I'd like to have you folks answer them. So why don't we get started? So the first question comes in from Peter. His question is, I have multiple data centers, BMSs. Will this work?
Thank you, Peter, for that question. It's a great question. Yes, it will work, and it will work very well. Not knowing what the scale of your environment is and not making any assumptions about it. Our solution is very flexible, it's very scalable, and also as your endpoints increase, our solution scales with that. We can add on more and more solutions as more and more capabilities to bring in all the data from these various endpoints. As far as having different BMSs, you wouldn't have to do a rip and replace. We have a very good solution called OptiFlex, which will actually pull the data from all your various BMSs, feed it into a WebCtrl instance, which will then feed it into Nlyte through our special integration. So yes, this will work very well. This whole integrated data center management solution will work very well with your multiple data centers, as well as with multiple BMS systems.
Thank you, KG. We have a lot of questions. This is great, so please keep them coming. Next question is from Jake. How would this work in a colo environment? Enzo, would you like to take that question?
Sure. Jake, thank you for the question. So it's interesting on colos, as we were working with Carrier and ALC to define IDCM, we had the benefit of working with several colos that were either joint customers already or just some market customers. And in fact, there are several features in IDCM specifically tailored for colos. If I were to highlight two, one is the ability to notify users based on SLAs. So you may recall before we used the cooling chain. So imagine that we do have a failure of a cooling element that will affect downstream workloads. we get that event in Nlyte, and we know not just the workloads, but the owners of that of those workloads, and we can notify them, which may very well be a requirement in our SLAs for colos. That's one example. Another one that I can think of is what we call parking lot to rack security. It's exactly what it sounds like. So now, with the integration through WebCtrl, ultimately with Linnell, you can now track a person as they enter the facility through the parking lot, through the perimeter security, as they travel through the security, perhaps as they get to the cage. And based on that, you can either pre-start certain events, you can have special auditing that may run. You may actually start or stop appropriate applications. And all of that is very appropriate to colo environments.
Okay. I would like to add one more thing to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to add one more use case to that. And so we also heard from one of our big colo customers the need for automating the visitor management process. This can also be very well accommodated within IDCM. Basically, what this would entail is when a visitor wants to either come in and wheel in a rack or visit their existing racks, the whole visitor management process can be automated by digitizing the invitations, the entry passes, all those things with minimal interference from security and with clear directions to the location of the racks or cages. So all these capabilities will also be, these are very specific to colo customers, and these capabilities will also be available through IDCM.
Thank you, KG. Thank you, Enzo. So the next question is from Susan. I use ServiceNow with my data center. How would IDCM work with that? Enzo, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll gladly take that one, Mark. Again, thank you for the question, Susan. So ServiceNow certainly is a very common management tool in data centers, and not surprisingly, there is a very specific integration within IDCM for ServiceNow. And ServiceNow can be either the originator of a request, such as I have a new server, I need to deploy it. And then, of course, that would be the origination, and you would use workflow for all of the different systems, even going down to telling the critical infrastructure that there's now a new server with a new particular thermal footprint. But ServiceNow can also be a participant in a workflow, so it does not need to be the originator. It could be the recipient. So, for example, you may very well have an environment where you have the critical infrastructure, WebCtrl, originating a request, such as there is a failure. And as a result of that failure, an event is raised, it flows through Nlyte, and Nlyte, we know who the particular owner of an asset is, and then we will send that request to ServiceNow to actually notify the user and manage the ticket and all the other magic that ServiceNow does. So there is again, since ServiceNow is such a common management tool, there was very specific integration within IDCM for ServiceNow.
Okay, thank you, Enzo. Next question. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. I'm sorry we're not going to get to them all, but by the way, we will get back to everyone, all the questions that were asked. I think we're coming to the end of the webinar here, so we're time for 2 more. This question's from Raj. What version of ALC is supported? KG, you want to take that one?
IDCM will work with the latest version of ALC, which is version 7.5, and it is backward compatible up to version 6.5. However, if you have an earlier version, please call us. We'll figure out a way to make it work for you. Maybe we will use OptiFlex to pull the data in from your earlier version and pass it on to get the integration going with Nlyte.
Okay, thank you, KG, for that answer. And here's our last question. As I said, we'll get to all the questions we didn't get to offline, but here's the last question. Maybe this one's for you, Enzo. What groups/users would be most interested in IDCM? I'm assuming that means groups within an organization.
Actually, KG, maybe you want to take this first, because I think most of the users. I think it would be helpful if you take it first.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be glad to, Enzo. So most of the users within colos or enterprise data centers would be infrastructure and facilities people who would be mostly interested. But since a lot of their activities now are getting dictated by IT people, for example, when you have, it would be relevant for them also. For example, when you have an incident and you need to inform IT that there's going to be something happening at a certain rack within a certain aisle, then facilities can give IT a heads up, and IT can then make the necessary adjustments and plans for their applications. So the groups within and users within data centers would be director or manager of infrastructure, facilities managers, and people with like the designation, such designations. Do you want to take on, answer the question on the IT side, Enzo?
Yeah, in fact, I just wanted to elaborate on one point that you already mentioned. So traditionally, the users would be the traditional users, which are the infrastructure managers, the data center operators. But if you look at now extending the critical infrastructure and tightly integrating it all the way up the stack, and emerging, and I think a much larger community could be the IT operators, the IT managers, where they are now looking at factors such as where is the right footprint to run these workloads? What is the risk for a given workload? What is the cost for a given workload? And those elements really are the responsibility of IT. And in fact, that a lot of the input that we had in the market around IDCM, I would say a very good portion of it came directly from the IT organizations around those kinds of requirements. So I think the interesting thing with IDCM, if you look at the technology, it spans the endpoints. If you look at the users, they will equally span everything from critical infrastructure and infrastructure management all the way up to IT and IT management.
Okay. Well, thank you for those answers, gentlemen, and thank you for the presentation. We appreciate all that information. For everyone that we didn't get to your answers, as I said, we'll get to you. I'm sorry, we didn't get to your questions. We will get to you offline. We'd like to thank you for the time you spent on this webinar. As I said, if you'd like to reach out, we've got contacts with Brad and Jeremy here on the slide. And again, we hope to see you on a future webinar. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.